Welcome back, everyone. Hour 3 of the program, Super Talk Mississippi. Gerard and Rhino in the Element Well studios on this
Friday, y'all.
Brad White, the Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation, is in the house. Appreciate you coming on there, Mr. Executive Director.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
So, and I know it's a bit of short notice because we just found out about the governor's announcement yesterday afternoon, of the proposal, I think at this point. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, to allocate $1.3 billion of state funds to various infrastructure projects across the state. You were just sharing with me before we came online, you got multiple sources of funding into DOTD. It's separate from the general fund.
Oh, yes.
You got multiple sources. Of course, fuel taxes, a major source. The federal government, some state funding, other fees as well. Where's this pot of money coming from that the governor seeks to allocate for infrastructure?
Well, it's my understanding that where he's wanting to take the funds with which to implement his proposal would come from some of the surplus revenue that we have now, or some of the leftover one-time money we have now in various accounts. So it's existing money, as I understand it, but I'm unfamiliar with the details about exactly which one. But I do think it's important to understand the type of projects that the governor's talking about. We've been very fortunate in that all of our state's leaders have been very supportive of our infrastructure system. We had probably the biggest budget MDOT's ever had last year, thanks to the legislature and the governor's involvement in helping to push that up. But back when we were struggling to have money, one of the programs that we implement as a department that had been put on hold more or less had been our capacity program, which is not the resurfacing of highways or the regular work that you may see around the state. These are the major construction projects where a roadway has no longer adequately handling the volume of traffic on it in a safe or efficient way. An example would be the Greenville bypass that's being constructed now, or when Highway 49 was widened in Richland and Florence. And due to our need to focus on the rehabilitation of the existing system, for about 10 years, the capacity program had sat dormant for the most part. So when the Federal Highway Administration was reauthorized a couple of years ago, and we received $1 billion extra over a 5-year period, the Department of Transportation was able to restart that capacity program. Unfortunately, all those projects that were in there were at different stages in the life of the project, and the pre-construction from planning to construction can take 6 to 8 weeks because you have environmental, you have roadway design, the purchase of right-of-way. So what the governor was talking about, and I know what the lieutenant governor and the speaker have been interested in, is figuring out why the state has a surplus of funds. What's the best way to move major construction projects forward for economic development purposes, safety purposes, as well as the overall health of the program? So we started out looking at what would be the first in line projects that in the life of that project that we've completed or are near completion of the pre-construction phase, will have all the utilities removed and have a right-of-way certificate on the project, and would be able, if the money was there, to award a contract and begin construction. So the governor sat down with us and started looking at what would be done next year, what could be done the next, and ultimately he came up with a list out of our program that could be constructed over the next 6 years, and that's where he arrived at that number that he had.
Okay, so I'm just looking at the report. I think the proposal calls for 49 different independent infrastructure projects, and the governor explained some of those that are on that list as well, and it's across the state.
Right, it's 19 that pertain to MDOT.
Okay.
So his presentation also had a lot of Mississippi Development Authority, ports and economic development, site development, and other type of projects that would fall in infrastructure, but that don't pertain to us.
Okay.
So we ultimately, the list that he chose to go with had 19 projects that deal with our interstates or our highways, that if we had the funding, we could go ahead and program for the construction of these, and hopefully upon building them, get them out of the queue, which would allow everything else that's still going through the pre-construction phases to be to a point that when those are built, we would have the general revenue stream to go ahead and build those, and basically allow us to catch up from the time we lost.
Makes sense. I understand. So, and then of course, Brad, always the issue, or the question, I should say, that Mississippians have when they see these sorts of projects being planned is when do we get started? How long did this take? this is an involved process.
It is. Right now, I think we have about 7 projects that if everything stays on schedule and we had the funding for the construction up front, that we could award those contracts next year and start those processes. Most of those projects, it would take, multiple years to build them to completion.
Right.
But there's about 7 or 8 on the list of 19 that the governor presented that we could start next year. I think there's another 6 that could come the following year, and then 2, smaller as we go out. That's if everything stayed on track, with the pre-construction phases. But the reason that I think that makes sense to do it that way is because the worst thing we could do is take money and devote it to trying to start new projects at the very beginning, because we have so many that are still in the pre-construction phase. What we do not want to have is so many that we're trying to get ready for construction that as they become ready, we don't have the revenue stream to build any of them.
Yeah.
Because then they sit on a shelf, standards change, we end up having to reevaluate, redo an environmental document, and it's just a waste of the taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
So I think the smart part about the approach that the governor put out, whether they go with all of these projects or some of these projects, is to try to move the ones that are ready to go out of the queue so everybody else could move up.
Okay.
And that's what I like most about this project, is I think it allows us to carry out our mission as a department, but it would allow us to do it in a way that kind of would help every project that we're trying to work on advance through our program.
Well, I think a resounding theme we hear from the 3 commissioners, of course, is we could do a lot more if we had more money. And I think that's absolutely true. Commissioner Willie Simmons in the Central District issued a statement yesterday that I saw, and I haven't seen from the other 2, and they may have as well, but living in Central Mississippi, I'm on the mailing list for that. And he hailed this decision by the governor as something that's desperately needed. And he also pointed out that, by committing now and getting these projects let and awarded now, we're getting ahead of potential inflation.
Oh, yeah, that's
and
a
thus
major
keeping costs
problem.
down. Yeah.
We had one of these major projects that we were able to award this year. The original estimate was somewhere around 180-something million, and by the time we were able to award the contract, it was about 213.
Unbelievable.
And these are massive. These are not your normal projects. These are massive projects. But inflation has been a real detractor in us, because while we've been very fortunate, thanks to Congress and to the state legislature, to have more money than we've had before, that money doesn't go as far. But that's still what I still think we need to do, is rather bemoaning that fact, is we still just play with the cards we're dealt and just make sure that we're trying to use these funds in a way that gets the taxpayer the biggest bang for their buck. And I think that would be by starting at the top of this list of shovel-ready projects and starting one by one to try to move them out of the queue so everybody else can move up. And to me, that just makes sense.
And the governor made a point yesterday. I do believe he's a governor that is fairly keenly focused on growing the state's economy and attracting new economic investment into the state. He made the point yesterday that the state's infrastructure is critical in attracting new industry into our state, or expansion of existing industry, and he believes this will be a stimulative in that regard.
Well, Senator Trent Lott used to say when he was in the Senate that if they can't get here, they're not coming, about large companies that we would try to locate here. And obviously being able to move goods and people and receive the materials that they need in order to carry out the work that particular company would do, they have to have good roads and bridges, rail, other modes of transportation around them to support that. And so by enhancing our system, I think we do take major steps toward economic development. But beyond that, we're creating a system that's safer for the Mississippians that have to use it every day. We're protecting the investment that they have now. Currently, taxpayers of this state have a investment in their transportation system that is valued at over $65 billion.
Wow.
And so we have the mission of trying to protect and maintain that investment, but at the same time move through this nearly $7 billion list of capacity projects that are needed to keep it efficient and as safe as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's the process here, Brad? Now, I mean, the governor's made this proposal. We've still got to go through a legislative process, right?
Oh, yeah. And,
since the capital fund, the
these
general
conversations have been going on. Like I said, the lieutenant governor and speaker both are very supportive of this, and it'll just be the negotiation process of the legislature and see how this balances with other needs that they see, and hopefully we'll be able to find some type of common ground that allows us to do some of this, and I'm confident we will.
Okay. Sounds good. Appreciate you coming in and
Thank you
giving
for
us an
having me.
update.
I appreciate
Yes,
it.
Brad White, Executive Director of the Mississippi Department of Transportation. Before you go, I just want to tell you that I had breakfast with some mutual friends this morning, and they were extremely complimentary of you and your work, and I just wanted to pass that on to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's
You
very
got it.
kind.
Brad White, Executive Director of MDOT, has been our guest on Middays. We're coming right back.
6 days on the road and I'm gonna make it home tonight. 6 days on the road and I'm gonna make it home tonight.